Hello, everyone. I'm here with a day 16 recap of Karen Reed. Let's get into it. Ooh, sorry about that. Here we go.
Current qualified lessees can get this 2025 Equinox for around $299 a month. Or well-qualified buyers can get 2.9% APR plus no monthly payments for 90 days.
Let's be honest, most minimal wallets weren't designed with women in mind. Bulky, boring, and impossible to work with your favorite bag. But then I just...
Plus no monthly payments for 90 days.
You're watching NBC 10 Boston. News worthy of you. Tonight, exploring the cause and manner of John O'Keefe's death.
I did not see any evidence of an impact site.
A medical examiner goes over her findings.
In your autopsy report, did not determine the cause of those wounds to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
That's correct.
What she believes ended the officer's life. Plus, an update on the buffer zone around the courthouse. Details on the new ruling that impacts trial watchers. Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, starts right now.
It was a difficult day for the jury. The group was faced with the most graphic evidence yet. Good evening, everyone. I'm JC Monahan.
And I'm Glenn Jones. A medical examiner was brought in to focus on John O'Keefe and the autopsy performed after his death. Our Melanie Mendez joins us now live outside Norfolk Superior Court with more on today's testimony. Mel.
Well, Glenn and JC, you put it perfectly. This was really the most graphic evidence these jurors have seen yet, and we saw evidence of that in court. But before the medical examiner even showed these autopsy photos of John O'Keefe, the judge stopped to give the jury some instructions. Listen.
Your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs may be unpleasant or graphic. The defendant is entitled to a verdict based solely on the evidence and not based on pity or sympathy for Mr. O'Keefe.
And with those instructions began a graphic day in court. The jury shown autopsy photos with medical examiner Dr. Irene Scorti-Bello detailing the injuries, including a laceration to the back of his head and skull fractures.
The cause of death was determined to be blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia.
But the manner of death, how those injuries happened, she could not conclude. On cross-examination, there was a renewed focus on the involvement of former trooper Michael Proctor. Scorti-Bello said before she performed the autopsy, investigators told her that O'Keefe's death involved a possible person struck by a motor vehicle.
I tried to state the injuries, and then I use all kinds of other investigative information.
Attorney Bob Alessi trying to show the importance of that investigative information provided by Michael Proctor and noting the medical examiner wasn't given any other possible scenarios.
Did you consider whether Mr. O'Keefe could have died somewhere other than where the body was found and been moved and placed in the snow? Did you consider that?
Alessi then asking about grass, the absence of it, setting up his argument that O'Keefe didn't fall on the lawn.
Assuming a fall backwards onto frozen ground, and there being on a lawn with grass, would you expect to see any grass at all in the injury site?
It's possible to have grass.
Do you see any evidence of grass in this depiction?
No, I do not.
In what could be a pivotal moment in the case, the doctor was asked if she examined O'Keefe's body for any signs of collision with a vehicle, the prosecution's theory.
I did examine his lower extremities. That is protocol in any case of suspected impact with a motor vehicle. What I look for is some sort of bruise, either on the outside of the leg or bleeding on the inside or any fracture of the bones of the legs. I did not observe those things.
Now, look, when the doctor was asked about the laceration above John O'Keefe's eye, the defense specifically asked, could that be evidence of a fight? That is, of course, their theory of the crime, to which she said, yes, it could be consistent with a punch. But just moments later, then we saw prosecutor Hank Brennan stand up, and on redirect, he asked about his theory of the crime, basically saying, could those same injuries have been caused by shards of glass or shards of sharp plastic? To which the doctor said, yes, potentially. So both of them having their theories somewhat confirmed by the medical examiner. Glenn and JC, back to you.
Melody, thank you. And we want to go more into the medical examiner's testimony because outside of court today, Karen Read reacted to what was said on the stand.
Here's what she had to say when she addressed the media.
What do you think? Does the ME help your case or help the prosecution?
Our case.
Karen, can you reflect on Bob's comments? Not from falling backwards. She can't identify the wounds on the arm. She can't identify the lacerations on his eye, on his nose.
Joining us now is Emily D. Baker, a former Los Angeles County prosecutor who's been following the case on her YouTube channel. Hello, Emily. It's good to have you back. Today we heard testimony about John O'Keefe's autopsy, the injuries that contributed to his death. At times, Emily, it seemed the medical examiner's findings were not perfectly aligned with the Commonwealth's theory of how O'Keefe was killed. What were your takeaways having watched the testimony?
The coroner is an incredibly neutral witness in this case, and I imagine the jury's been waiting to hear from the coroner. But we know this from the first trial, and we've seen it again, where the coroner says, look, we examined the lower extremities to see if that was consistent with a vehicle collision, because that's what we would expect to see. And I think the most powerful takeaway from the coroner's testimony today was at the very end of testimony, the prosecution asked her all the information she knew, including Karen Read's statements to numerous witnesses. And the coroner said that she knew all of those things. And then we knew it was coming when Alessi got back up on recross and said, and you knew all of this and still were not able to categorize this as a homicide. That undetermined ruling has been a big win today for the defense.
Let's talk more about that because Dr. Scorbello went on record about the cause of John O'Keefe's death, talking about the head wound, blunt trauma to the head with a little bit of signs of hypothermia. Manner of his death remains undetermined even all these years later. Let's take a little clip of what she had to say and we'll talk.
The amended death certificate in this case stated that the cause was blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia, and the manner was undetermined.
Okay, just before we talk about it, I want to make a quick note about the amended death certificate that she mentioned. The initial certificate was issued so John's family could make service arrangements, and then once all the test results were in, the medical examiner released an updated / amended version. So that's just think of it more like a complete
I was trying to figure out what was the purpose behind that.
To both sides, and who came out the winner?
I think it was really notable the way that they walked through the fact that the coroner could choose to amend that further should she find new information, continued investigation, and she still chose not to. So at the end of the day, I think the jury has a full picture that the coroner could still update that death certificate and did not. So at the end of the day, that undetermined finding is a win for the defense. But the blunt force head trauma is consistent with what the Commonwealth has said is a fall backwards on ground. Then again, the defense says, but the injuries to the face aren't consistent with a fall back to the ground. Those would have had to come from another mechanism. So there's a lot there for both sides, but I think more for the defense from the coroner's testimony today.
So then bottom line this for us, Emily, did the medical examiner give the jury enough scientifically or anecdotally to believe John O'Keefe was hit by a car?
I think the coroner left room for questions, and we will see what the accident reconstructionists say. But at the end of the day, I can see the defense arguing the coroner knew what you know, and she was unable to make a determination. I think it gives them a lot of room to argue over doubt. But we haven't seen the Commonwealth's new accident reconstructionist, and we did hear Hank Brennan say, what about if somebody is clipped? What about if somebody is sideswiped? What about a car that backs into a person? Because the injuries that the coroner was looking for are from collisions with vehicles moving forward into someone. So there's room for the Commonwealth to argue there, but I think they have some pretty big hurdles to overcome.
Can we just go back to yesterday for a moment? There was so much discussion about shards of glass, a strand of hair that was found on the exterior of Karen Read's vehicle. It seems like, this would be helpful for prosecutors, but jurors may have a hard time accepting the evidence stayed put after so much driving. That was the defense's point. Oh, it went X amount of miles in this blizzard and yet one hair hung on to the bumper. Emily, what's your take on the strength of that evidence?
I don't really put a lot of weight into the hair and even the glass or even DNA on the car, because if the DNA on the car is John O'Keefe's, this was a car that was regularly parked at his home that he interacted with, that he was in and out of somewhat frequently. And with the hair on the car, I don't know what the jurors will make of it. How much driving around with snow on the car holds things onto the car, I don't know. But it is, I don't live where it snows as much as y'all, but it's really interesting whether or not that hair moved, because that is what the defense is going to use to argue about things being placed on the car, and were they or were they not. At the end of the day, I think the glass is the most interesting part, and wasn't it an interesting moment when they were fighting over whether...
Thank you so much, Emily D. Baker. It's always great to have you on. We hope to see you again before we get to the end of this trial.
Enjoy LA weather. We do want to have a quick... We do want to have a quick reminder here. Karen Read has pleaded not guilty to hitting and killing John O'Keefe with her SUV, and she is the only person charged in this case. Now, inside the courtroom today, Karen, just like the jury, saw those autopsy photos, and our courtroom insider Sue O'Connell also saw them. Those of us who watch on the streaming did not. I don't even know what was it like in the courtroom? I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible to see photos anyway. Often in these sort of situations, you're detached from it because you don't know the person. But remember, we now know John O'Keefe from being in the courtroom. The jurors do as well. We keep watching that dash cam video of him being taken in a stretcher. We certainly see the photos of him with, his niece and nephew and all that sort of stuff. So it's now a person. It's not just evidence. And it was really difficult, I think, for folks to watch. They were very graphic, not just of the wounds, but of internal parts of his body. There were members of the O'Keefe family who were crying, there were two younger people with the O'Keefes who were openly sobbing at one point. So it was difficult, and at one point one of the jurors had to leave the room. We don't know if it was directly associated to seeing it, but the court officer interrupted the judge and said one of the jurors needs a break. So it was a difficult day, both of visual evidence of a human being who is no longer with us and this medical information.
Just a side note, Peggy O'Keefe was not in court today, his mom, right?
Right, correct.
She's been there every day.
Yep.
Karen Read, the defendant, are you able to see her reaction to some of these images, which I suppose she'll be seeing some of them for the second time?
Yeah, or possibly even, it's evidence that she's overseeing as well. So she's certainly seen it. We couldn't see her face during it. The jurors could see her if they were looking at her to some degree. She's been much more stoic than she was in the first case. I don't think that she had any visible reaction, and then after the break, we didn't see her. She's definitely, as we reported, she was out ill was it yesterday? I'm getting a little day before yesterday. So she doesn't still seem like she's firing on all options here, but it was definitely a tough day for everyone.
All right, Sue, you're not going to go anywhere, right? Stay with us. Thank you.
When we come back, defense attorney Morgiana de Rissiere will join the conversation. And up next, we dig into the revision to the buffer zone surrounding the courthouse in Denham. Sue offers her take on what this could mean for the atmosphere outside of court. Plus, our legal expert explains whether or not the revision is a surprise.
And we always want to talk about this. We want to take a moment to remember John O'Keefe. This is the victim in this case. The Braintree native was a Boston police officer. There you see him in uniform. He was the legal guardian of his niece and nephew after the children lost both of their parents to illness. That was his sister and brother-in-law. You're watching Canton Confidential, the Karen Read murder trial.
Sealy Posturepedic Pro mattresses are designed with your comfort in mind for a better night's sleep. At Bernie & Phil's, choose from innerspring and hybrid models, complete with an exclusive precision fit coil system for the ultimate in targeted core support and a cool-to-touch cover.
Unfortunately, I really
Sealy
can't fast
Posturepedic
forward
Pro mattress
this
purchase, receive 2
all
free
that
pillows
much.
plus a free box spring or an adjustable base upgrade. We have
Hold on.
everything you need for a restful night's sleep on a new Sealy Posturepedic Pro mattress from Bernie & Phil's.
Okay, here we go.
See how thousands of people are getting laptops, cameras, and more for $1 down with no credit needed.
Sergeant Yuri Buchanan. So we want to play an example of some of his testimony compared to responses from a crime lab scientist.
The mission was to go through the phone to look for digital evidence that's related to the crime. The fact that he wrote, nude so far, I cannot comment on.
You cannot comment on, or you don't want to comment on?
I don't know what he was looking for in that specific time.
Did you do DNA analysis on the swab?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I don't work in the DNA unit, so that is the job of a different analyst.
At some point, did you take that item that had been preserved and put it into evidence?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so those are just snippets, but the idea being that, one is rapid fire, yes, no, I don't. Another one is more labored, we will say. I'm going to ask both of you, but starting with Morgietta, jurors have to take note, I assume, of how witnesses answer questions on the stand.
Absolutely, and all witnesses, their credibility is pretty much at the heart of any answer that they give. Not only what they say, how they say, do they roll their eyes, are their shoulders back, are they standing up straight or sitting back straight?
How they answer and their body language.
With their common sense. And you're supposed to analyze not only what they say, but again, how they say it. And if it comes off, the juror can take that testimony as not credible, meaning that it's evidence that when they go back into the deliberation, they can disregard if they really want to. So it's very important how they answer.
Was evasive a fair word for Buchanan in your view?
Well, listen, there were 2 other Commonwealth witnesses who were asked directly. Was Michael Proctor, the supervisor of the lead investigator, and they said yes. They didn't say, well, it depends on this or that. Listen, Buchanan added at least a half a day to testimony. There's no doubt about it. And when you compare his testimony to these other state Commonwealth witnesses who on cross-examination answered yes, no, and then Hank Brennan gets up on redirect and cleans it up. So what did you mean by that? Was it your job to do that? That's how it's supposed to work, right? You rely on your prosecutor or your defense attorney to come up and make sense of what the other side just did to you. But you don't make it worse by trying to avoid it, because they're going to get you one way or another.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention now to a revision of the buffer zone surrounding the Norfolk Superior Courthouse. The zone still exists, but there's some major changes coming. For some background, ahead of the retrial, Judge Cannoni extended the previous buffer zone surrounding the courthouse. Her ruling said no one could wear shirts or hold signs that advocated for either side within several hundred feet of the courthouse. However, that ruling was challenged in court by some of Reed's supporters, who won on appeal.
So Judge Cannoni has now issued an amended ruling. People are allowed on public streets and sidewalks near the courthouse as long as they remain peaceful and don't obstruct trial participants. Noisy protests or yelling meant to interfere with the administration of justice or as an attempt to influence trial participants are prohibited within the zone. Now, the same goes for the display of written or graphic materials. Morgietta, are you surprised that this was overturned? And this is key if you're just sort of joining in on this. What happened outside the court the first trial was as dramatic as what was happening inside the court, and we haven't had that this time because of the extended buffer zone.
I'm not surprised it was overturned, and I'm also not surprised that Judge Cannoni issued it in the first place. I think it's no surprise that this is, again, a high-profile case, not only in Massachusetts, but literally around the world. People are talking about it, reading about it, listening to it every single day. But at the heart of it, it's still a trial, and you have to let it be fair.
Okay, 5 more minutes.
There are people outside of the courthouse on who's
whoever side that you're for, you have to make sure that it doesn't influence what's happening on the inside of
Right.
the courthouse. And I think it's pretty safe to
Fair
say that
needs to
everybody
be a
agrees
fair
that
trial.
it was very noisy the first time around. There was, witness intimidation issues that are coming up, and you don't want that to interfere in the trial at all, whether you're a supporter or if you're not a supporter. So I think she did the right thing by putting it in the first place, but I'm not surprised it got overturned because people have a right to be there, right? If the courtroom was bigger,
Facts.
they'd have more people seated inside the courtroom too, but you have to do
Long
it
as it's a
legally. You cannot
peaceful
interfere with the
protest.
administration of justice, so I think it was a right call, and hopefully people abide by it, right? And that's a big thing.
Didn't our juror say that he could hear?
You can't.
Yeah,
You could
during
hear
deliberations.
You can. I was in the back of the building during deliberations, and every time Karen and her team came out of where they were staying at the church, you could hear a cheer. So listen, I obviously believe in the First Amendment.
Everybody in this building does.
Absolutely. You have the right to express your. I also believe that Karen Reed deserves a fair trial. Everyone deserves a fair trial. And we look at this sometimes about the Karen Reed supporters being out there yelling, but what if a juror was in there and thought, what are they yelling about? I'm going to vote against her because I think this is crazy. So, trying to protect her right, which is all of our rights, to a fair trial and our First Amendment right, this is what the balance has to be.
So, how do you expect tomorrow is different, tomorrow being this new ruling taking effect?
So what I think will eventually happen, once people get more vacation time and schools start closing, especially in other parts of the country, that people will come. There are already people standing on the steps, walking through. It's going to become more crowded. How people behave and if it actually becomes some sort of rally thing, this prohibits that in some ways, but we'll see.
And probably more police presence also too. I think you're going to see a lot of that.
I can understand. Well, if the first trial is any indication, it does.
And I would
create-
also warn folks, if you're driving by, do not stop. The state police will pull you over and give you a ticket. There's a crosswalk. There are noise rules. Do not gawk and drive. If you're going to come by, find a place to park and walk by. Do not drive by.
Margie, as we near the end of what we believe is the prosecution's case, what still needs to be accomplished in your view that hasn't been accomplished yet?
So today, as we can see, we're finally getting to the technical medical evidence that we've been waiting for. And I think strategically it was very smart to do that at the end. A lot of the character witnesses, as everybody knows, had some issues with credibility and remember things and stating things on the record. So the jury is now left with the technical evidence. We still haven't heard from the accident reconstructionist yet. That's right. And the prosecution still may have an opportunity to do some more rebuttal witnesses.
Okay, good. We almost at the end.
Depending on how the accident reconstructionists testify. So I think a little bit more technical, maybe a few more days of that. But we're nearing the end of what really is a prosecution's case in chief.
All right.
Thank you both, Morgiana and Sue, as always. Thank you. And on that note, by the way, we are expecting the next witness at least soon. The medical examiner was today. We're expecting testimony from neurosurgeon Dr. Isaac Wolf. It's believed he'll talk specifically about the head injuries on John O'Keefe. That's someone to watch for, whether it's tomorrow or early next week.
Yeah, one of the next witnesses for sure. And if you have questions about this case, keep sending them our way. The email address is on your screen.
Okay, I think we're done.
NBCUNI.com. We'll answer as many questions as we can.
And remember to join us every weeknight at 7 on NBC 10 Boston. We'll have a full recap
Yeah, they're
of
done.
developments from court.